It was meant to be a simple, straightforward sale. 5 whole months had slipped by, a period everyone assured me was long enough. Long enough to move forward, to finally let go, to remember how to breathe. The car had remained in the garage untouched, a silent monument to a past life. The interior still held her scent. A faint whisper of perfume, vanilla, and something synthetic I could never name. I opened the driver's side door slowly, with a reverence usually reserved for a sacred space, or perhaps a tomb. A thin layer of dust covered everything, and the silence that greeted me was heavy, offering no comfort. I worked methodically, lost in the routine. I've always been that kind of man. I cleaned the console, carefully wiped down the dashboard, and vacuumed the floor mats. Then I reached for the glove compartment. The latch clicked open, and in that single, mundane moment, my entire world began to shatter. Inside was an envelope, thick and worn soft at the edges from handling. My name was written on the front in her distinct, careful, and slightly slanted handwriting. I just stared at it, my heart hammering against my ribs. Time itself seemed to freeze. She never wrote me letters. Not when she was alive. She absolutely despised goodbyes. My fingers trembled, just for a second, before I steeled myself and tore it open. Inside, I found a single photograph. And tucked behind it, a hotel receipt. It was for 3 nights at a luxurious beachfront resort. The name on the receipt was one I had never heard before, yet I recognized it instantly. I had seen this man just once, standing in the very back row at her funeral, his shoulders shaking with tears that seemed more violent than my own. I sat there, frozen in the driver's seat of her car, for what felt like an entire hour, just staring at that picture. The photo was candid, too intimate and natural to have been staged. Her head was resting comfortably on his shoulder. His hand was possessively on her thigh. They were both smiling, but it was more than just happiness. They looked deeply comfortable, utterly familiar with each other, as if this was a scene they had lived out 100 times before. The date stamped on the hotel receipt was a punch to the gut. It was from 3 months before she died. 3 months before the accident that took her from me. She had told me she was going on a silent retreat, that she desperately needed some space to find herself. Like a fool, I gave it to her without a single question. But sitting there, I didn't feel anger. Not at first. What flooded my veins was something quieter, far colder, like a sheet of ice slowly spreading beneath my skin. A chilling realization that nothing was adding up. I remembered her text messages from that week. They had been strange, oddly formal and distant, but I had dismissed it as stress from work. Now, I reread every one of them. Suddenly, every single word looked like a carefully constructed lie. I searched for the man's name online. I found his social media profiles easily. He didn't wear a wedding ring in any of his pictures, but he had posted a tribute to her on the day she died. It read, Forever M. Just M. No last name, no tags. But I knew. I knew then that she had been in his heart, and in his bed, while I was patiently waiting at home for her to return. I didn't confront anyone. Not yet. Instead, I became a detective, a quiet archaeologist of my own betrayal. I studied and analyzed every detail. Every corner of the life we had built together was now a crime scene I had to process. I combed through old emails, hunted for hidden folders, and scoured archived messages. She had been meticulous, incredibly good at covering her tracks, but she wasn't perfect. Nobody ever is. There were traces, tiny clues she must have never thought I'd ever look for. A duplicate hotel key card tucked deep inside a coat pocket. A shade of lipstick I had never, ever seen her wear. A shared music playlist. I forced myself to listen to all of it, every last second of those 3 hours of someone else's memories. And then I found more photos. They were in a cloud backup she had forgotten to delete entirely. Pictures of him kissing her neck. Photos of her laughing with a pure, unguarded joy that I hadn't seen directed at me in years. I drove to that hotel, quietly, just to see it for myself. The receptionist there remembered her. In fact, she remembered them. She mistook me for the man from the photographs. I didn't bother to correct her. I hope your wife comes back to visit us soon, she said with a warm, friendly smile. I just nodded slowly and said, "She never really left." And it was true. Not in the way that mattered. Pieces of her were scattered everywhere, embedded in the memories of strangers, but they were no longer a part of my memory. Not anymore. The final, undeniable confirmation arrived in a plain manila envelope from a private investigator. I hadn't hired him out of blind rage, but out of a cold need for precision. I needed to see the entire horrifying picture. His report was brutally thorough. It was a detailed ledger of dates, names, receipts, and witness statements. The affair hadn't been a recent fling. It went back 2 full years. And it wasn't just with one man. It was with two. The man from the photo and another man, who was apparently his friend. She had built an entire hidden life, a complex pattern of deception constructed right beside the one we shared. I didn't react. I didn't scream or break down crying. I simply waited. I found the man from the photograph and sent him a small, anonymous package. It contained just the candid photo and a simple, typed note. She told us both we were the only one. He replied 3 days later. His message was short. I didn't know. "I'm so sorry." I didn't answer him. I wasn't looking for an apology. My only goal was to make sure he knew the truth, that his perfect memory of her was now as fractured as my own. Later, her sister invited me to a family memorial dinner, marking the 5-month anniversary. Everyone would be there, all her friends, all our family, everyone ready to share fond stories. I went. I wore a clean shirt, I shaved, and I appeared perfectly calm. Everyone smiled at me with pitying eyes, seeing only the grieving husband, a man still lost in his sorrow. I waited. I waited until dessert was served, until the table had grown quiet and comfortable. Then I stood up. I found something, I announced to the room. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out the photograph. I held it up for everyone to see. A dead silence fell over the room. Her mother let out a sharp, horrified gasp. Her sister immediately looked down at her plate, unable to meet my gaze. I slowly walked over to the man who had just given a beautiful speech minutes earlier about her unwavering loyalty and faithfulness. I placed the photograph down on the table directly in front of him. "No more lies," I said, my voice soft but clear, devoid of any anger, carrying only the immense weight of the truth. Then I turned and I left. The air in the room fractured behind me. I heard voices suddenly rise in a confused, shocked uproar. I heard chairs scrape violently against the floor as people stood. But I didn't turn back to look. Not even once. I sold the car the very next day. I didn't even bother to vacuum the passenger seat this time. The man who bought it shook my hand and commented on what good condition it was in. I just nodded in agreement. It wasn't. Not at all. But that was something he simply didn't need to know. As I walked home, I caught my reflection in a dark shop window. I stopped and really looked at myself. I didn't see a widower anymore. I didn't see a victim. I saw a man who finally knew the entire ugly truth and who had finally, mercifully, set its crushing weight down. She took my love and she buried it somewhere I will never, ever be able to find. So I simply returned the favor. The final price for my freedom was one photograph and a permanent, unbreakable silence. And I still sleep just fine most nights.